So, Michael, how are you feeling?
Excited about the conversation, Renee. Ambivalent about the situation we find ourselves in. I think on the one hand, there are so many truly interesting and complex environmental challenges we're faced with, and I find those overwhelming. I find it hard to get my head around from what needs to get done, how to get it done. But at the same time, I find myself very grounded and very excited working for the organization I work for, because I really believe that the team I get to work with, the broader organization, is ultimately an organization that might make a difference and might help us to find some of the answers to these broader challenges. And I would say I'm a little anxious as well, because I just don't know whether we are going to do it fast enough and whether we find the right solution. So ambivalent with a little bit of an anxiety.
Okay. Can you give us a sense of what your world is like? What are you overseeing?
Yeah. So I lead an amazing team here at Google that is responsible for all these workplace programs that make working at Google so interesting. Our Food at Work program, our global events team, transportation, health and performance, as well as the sustainability team and program for RUS, real estate and workplace services. And what I think is so interesting is that these different programs all have to do with well-being, health, performance, and now sustainability as well. And I think for the context of our conversations today, what I find is that no matter what you're involved with these days, sustainability plays a role. And I think in our world, we have that opportunity, and I think a responsibility as well, to really to think through how can we use our environment as a working lab, one, to make our own environment more sustainable, and then two, share our learnings, the good, the bad, and the ugly, with the broader world.
So you're overseeing an incredible part of the organization that is quite complex, because on the one hand, you're providing amenities, services, but you're also Google, and you're driving systemic transformative change. You know, you're known for your moonshots, for audacious goals, and you in your role and in this organization are marrying those. And I'm really curious to hear about, how do you navigate the pressure? Do you ever feel overwhelmed by what you are taking on and what you're overseeing?
Yes, for a variety of reasons. So I think the first one, I didn't grow up in the world of sustainability. So I grew up in the world of hospitality and moved as my role grew into overseeing and supporting sustainability as well. So I don't have the technical expertise and experience that many of my peers might have. So you're responsible for ultimately an area where you don't necessarily have what you really would like to have, experience and expertise. That makes it really, really hard, because how do I really know that what I'm actually guiding, leading, or influencing is really making the impact I would like it to make?
That sounds a bit stressful to me when I hear you describe that.
It is. But at the same time, there's always a positive as well. So I can ask the questions that others are not comfortable asking because they've been in the industry for so long. So I think that compensates for the lack of expertise. I think the second one is, as a senior leader in the organization, it is no longer about ultimately what I can do or what I know, but it's really about how do you unlock the knowledge, the passion and experience of all of those you get to work with, and figure out from how do you bring them together and get them to focus on where we really can make a difference and should make the difference. Mm-hmm. So I've learned, probably just based on necessity, that despite the experience and the knowledge, you can ultimately lead in this field as well. And what you bring to that field is probably a different perspective, which adds, I think, diversity of thought. And I think it avoids a little bit of this, we're all thinking alike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a bit about how you enter into these conversations as somewhat of a newcomer to sustainability, and how you have had to work with maybe different perspectives people's emotional responses. A lot of times leaders in these roles, you're dealing with a lot that is projected onto you. A lot of people's anxiety, sense of urgency is put onto you as the leader. Tell us what to do, show us the way, which can be quite a lot to handle. So can you say a bit about how you deal with that?
I try to deal with it on a daily basis. And it starts for me with, I'm a system thinker. So I like to drive change in a system and have a very systematic approach to the work that I do. So I really start with, what are ultimately our North Stars? What is it we want to achieve? And for me, the bolder, the better. Because I think by being bold, you really raise the expectations, and I really believe that people in general can do so much more than they think they can if you just ask them, what can you do? So to me, it's really about being bold and to think long term. And I think in our organization, that is really about that moonshot thinking as well. But then I go back to being grounded in reality and the here and now. And if you think about the organization I lead, it is about services delivery today. It is not about thinking what we're going to in 2030. So it is about combining the here and now with the boldness of where you want to be in 2030. And then you can ask these questions. Let me give you an example. So as an organization, we've committed to only use carbon-free energy 24/7 by 2030. And because my organization is responsible for the built environment and for the way we operate our buildings, that has now come to the sustainability team and to say, how do you go from where we are today in an operation in a world where so much of our energy is not clean 24/7? How do you go from here to the promised land in 2030? And what I've learned is that by just being very methodical, you can ultimately bring your organization to that mindset as well. And at the same time, the organization really brings to me this passion for and this sense of urgency from, we need to do it faster, and we probably need to do significantly more. So I found that ultimately by being so different, you become ultimately so much better together.
Can you say a bit about the impact of having these targets that are the pledging, the targets, the goals? So that's happening all across the landscape, and a lot of us are scrambling to cope and deal with that urgency, but also stress.
Totally.
And so can you tell us a bit about how that impacts you personally? As you've come into this role, you've been overseeing this organization. Now we're in a different moment than when you started even a couple of years ago. So what is that like for you?
It is both creating energy, and at times it makes me really nervous. But what I do like by making public commitments that have to be bold and are really almost unachievable, it forces you to not go for incremental change, but to think truly out of the box. I think the second one has to do with the theory of change and what motivates individuals. And for me it is, I preferred to go for an extraordinary bold goal and miss it by 10% than to go for an incremental objective and exceed it by 20%. Because to me it's almost like I want to go for to the moon and almost make it, versus just hanging around over here and tweaking and putzing around for a little bit more. So it's to me making bold commitments that are very uncomfortable. It's to an extent liberating because you get to think in a very different way.
So what are some ways that, in light of the intensity of life here at Google, which I know is quite intense, it's well known for being very fast-paced, very complex system, how do you stay grounded given the confluence of that intensity, being here, overseeing what you're seeing, massive part of the org and a massive part of Google's, frankly, impact and leadership? So you've got that factor with the high stakes of climate and mitigation of climate change impacts and all of that. How do you stay grounded? How do you stay sane? Do you stay sane?
I think I do.
Uh-huh.
But I think in 4 different ways. So one is I love to hike. So one of the benefits of this pandemic for me has been the ability to take significantly more hikes on a daily basis and to go into nature. I find that grounds me as a starting point. 2, conversations with individuals. I get energy from meeting different individuals and having many meaningful and at times just regular conversations. The 3rd one, travel and getting myself in different environments. Has been harder, I would say, over the last 18 months, but things are starting to open up. And 4thly, family. It's, one of the things that I've really come to appreciate over the last 18 months, just being much closer and much more frequently at home. So those 4 elements in different combinations over the weeks truly ground me in what I do on a regular basis.
So Michael, there's this tendency in the space to ricochet between hope and despair. And as leaders, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be hopeful. And you do strike me actually as quite a hopeful person. Can you share a bit with us? What are times when maybe you're not feeling as hopeful, when you might have other feelings come up for you in the nature of this work?
Yeah. So maybe as a starting point, Renee, I would consider myself a pragmatic optimist. So not necessarily a member of the Hope Police or the cheerleading squad. I do believe that the challenges are real. They're very, very overwhelming. And for sure, I don't have all the answers. And there are days where I'm just thinking, 1, it's not enough. We're not making clear progress. We don't have all the answers. And then you have these days where it's just so in your face. Like last year during the clear and very present wildfires. Makes it so real, and then you think wow, we're not doing enough. Another one is that I get triggered, we all get triggered by stories and how people show up. I don't believe that the world is truly on fire, despite what I just said about the wildfires. So when people show up, is that everything needs to stop, or we need to do everything just around sustainability? That triggers me as well, and I have to figure out but how can I harness that energy into ultimately a group of individuals that can work on where you can truly make an impact? There are those days where it's just overwhelming, but as a leader, I have to check that aspect of me at the door. And while I have to be authentic and really have to be Michael at work, you have to consider as well the impact that you make on how you show up on others. So it is be your authentic self at work, but with full consideration of how you ultimately bring others along and how you help others to be at their best concurrently.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for the conversation, Renee.